So welcome everybody to lesson 4 of Daniel part 2. We're looking at chapter 8 this week, and in chatting with a couple of you beforehand, it's like, whoa, this was a lot to look at, a lot to process. And that's true. It is. It's hard to wrap your brain around all of it all the time with all of the visions and comparing them and adding new facts. And a lot of it, we're going to be looking at, it's a lot of facts about this prophecy, about these visions, about what was about to happen in history that actually has been fulfilled. So we don't want to get bogged down in that, in all of those details, so that it overwhelms us. But we just want to pull out the truths that we can see and talk about how does that affect us? What can we know from this? Okay, so we don't want to lose sight of Daniel in all of it. Daniel as a person in all of it and what we know to be true about him. Okay, so let's take a look at chapter 8. And the first thing we want to do is put it in perspective on the timeline. When does chapter 8 take place?
At about 550.
Okay,
About 550 BC.
you're way ahead of me, Patricia. I was just looking at in the 3rd year of the reign of.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's
Sorry.
fine because it's the same thing. Okay. In the 3rd year of the reign of who?
Belshazzar.
Okay. And so again, which kingdom is this?
Babylon.
Babylon. Okay. So Daniel, we have to remember Daniel is in Babylon. He's in Babylon and he's in captivity there. And about how long has he been in captivity at this point? How old would he be?
65 years. He was 15, so wait, I'm sorry, 55.
Yeah, about 55 years that he's been in captivity.
So he's about 70.
He's about 70.
Sure. So he was about 15. And it's good for us to just keep going back and remembering this, because this is Daniel. This is where he is when all of this is happening to him. And he's still in Babylon. And all of these visions that he's having are about the coming kingdoms that have not yet happened. Okay. So if you have trouble understanding what's going on here, think about Daniel. Think about him when he saw these visions and how that affected him. So this is in the 3rd year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Okay. Do you remember anything about Belshazzar as far as his kingdom? It was
Finishes rather abruptly.
Right, it ended up abruptly. Okay. Because
he's the one who saw the handwriting on the wall.
Exactly. So I'm going to just restate this. Remember that chapters 1 through 6 were the overview of the entire time that Daniel was in captivity. Okay, from beginning to end. And now in 5 through 12, we're going back and putting each chapter on that timeline where it actually happened. So Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon, right? And because of the handwriting on the wall, then who came in after him?
Cyrus.
Right.
Darius. Yeah.
Right. The Medes and Persians. So, but this vision in chapter 8 happens about 11 years before that happens. Okay. So there's still about 11 years of the Babylonian rule at the point where Daniel has these visions. Okay. So he's totally in Babylon. And the King Belshazzar is still ruling. So let's move on. he sees a vision in verse 2. He sees a vision in verse 2. And where does that vision, I don't want to say where it takes place, but what does he see as far as geographically, where does the vision happen?
In Susa, in the province of Elam.
Mm-hmm.
alongside
Anybody-
the Ulay Canal.
Okay. Did anybody look that up, like where that is in comparison to where Daniel is?
Yeah, it's over kind of by the Tigris and Euphrates, over in that area, where it goes down into the, whatever it is, Persian Gulf or something.
Hmm.
Trying to find my
Yeah.
map.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Maps are always good, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
There.
But it's not in Babylon.
No.
So it's about 200 miles west of Babylon. It's actually, and Susa, the citadel of Susa, was built by the Persians. Okay. So remember where Daniel is and when this is. And so was that even built at the time Daniel had this vision? No.
Mm.
Yeah, because the Persians had not come in and taken over that area. They built it after. So what Daniel is seeing, this is the thing, what Daniel is seeing none of it has happened yet as far as these kingdoms. So imagine his confusion. Imagine his confusion when he sees these visions. Okay, so that's what he sees, where the vision takes place. So let's just talk about this vision for a little bit. And we just want to get the basics of it in verses 3 through 14. What is the vision that Daniel is seeing? What's the first part of the vision?
The ram
Okay,
with the two horns, one bigger than the other.
anything else about that vision?
And that the ram was venturing out, budding out westward, northward, and southward. And it seemed nobody could stand before him. There was no one to rescue from his power, and he did as he pleased.
Mm-hmm. So if you have your chart that has the statue and then chapter 7 and chapter 8, and if you filled that out, you can refer to that with just the details of what the vision was. So you have the ram. And then after the ram, what was the next part of the vision that he saw?
The goat.
Okay, the goat. Now tell me about the goat.
Well, he had a horn
Mhm.
between his eyes. A conspicuous horn.
Conspicuous horn. Yes.
And he attacked the ram.
Okay.
It's funny
What else
that
do we
he
see?
says he came from the west across the whole earth, like without touching the ground, like that, because in his mind, maybe like that was the end of the world. Like the
Mhm.
world was probably not very big to them at that time,
Right.
across the face of the whole earth. But then later we find out, didn't he just kind of come from Greece, which isn't really that far.
Any other comments about the goat and the horn?
Well, the large horn gets broken, and in
Mhm.
its place comes up four more conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. And then out of one of those, in verse 9, then came the the small horn, which grew exceedingly great both in the south, east, and toward the beautiful land, which I assume is Canaan, Israel.
Israel, good assumption. Okay. Remember what a horn represents from our previous lessons.
Kingdoms.
Okay, so the horn is representing that king, those kingdoms, right?
Mm.
So, and we've looked at in chapter 7 in that vision, we looked at a horn. It was the little horn that comes up and pulls out 3 by the roots. So now we have in chapter 8, we have the goat who has a big horn, and then that gets broken, and then you have 4 more horns. And then you have out of those 4, 1 small horn that grows exceedingly. Okay, so that's the vision. Anything else about the vision that you want to comment on? Up through verse 13.
Well, that little horn, he doesn't just make trouble on earth, he makes trouble in the heavens too. And he caused some, in verse 10, caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down, magnified himself equal to with the commander of the host, removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down.
Okay, we're going to look at that a little bit more in the interpretation. Okay, so this is what Daniel saw. This is the vision he saw. And then in verse 15, he said, I sought to understand it. And who is it that gives him the interpretation of this vision?
Gabriel.
Gabriel.
Gabriel. Okay, Gabriel. Clearly, we know that the angel Gabriel.
Isn't it amazing that it's even in chapter 7, it was a small horn that
Mhm.
rose up and started to dominate everything. And here we have a small horn. I'm sure that's really significant about how Satan works.
Yeah. Yeah, small horn that then all of a sudden just takes
Yeah.
over. Yes, right. Kind of inconspicuous horn, where that big
Yeah.
horn was a conspicuous horn. And then the little horn just is kind of there it is, and then yeah. So, and what does Gabriel tell him about when the vision pertains to?
The time of the end in verse 17.
The time of the end. Time of the end. So let's look at how Gabriel describes this vision. What is the interpretation of this vision? So in 18 through 26, we're going to look at the interpretation, because the interpretation gives us a little bit more detail than the vision does. So Daniel, what does Gabriel tell him about the ram?
I like that because it was, I like Gabriel because he just plainly states it. The ram represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn is its first king. You don't have to guess anymore.
Okay, you're talking about the goat.
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm talking about the goat. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so Gabriel says clearly, and we already knew this, that the ram the Medes and
The
Persians.
Medes and
So
the
we-
Persians,
right.
yeah, from
So
before.
we know that's the second kingdom. And we saw that from chapter 7 in that vision. Okay. So now Dave, now he's going to name the third kingdom. Okay. So Gabriel is very helpful for us. And so you were saying about the third kingdom, Dave?
Yes, in verse 20, or 21 says represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn is its first king.
Okay, so the large horn is its first king. Did anybody do any research on that in the commentaries? That who that large horn represents?
Alexander the Great.
Yes, Mark,
I know.
Alexander
Oh,
the
I
Great.
overspoke, I apologize.
That's okay. So Alexander the Great. And so that's when he comes in flying over the earth and really quickly taking over the Medes and Persians. So he conquers them. And then what happens to that horn?
It breaks off.
Mhm. What does that symbolize?
Death of the first king.
Yeah, death of the first king. And then it leaves the whole place in a turmoil. And then what do you have coming up?
4 kingdoms.
4. Okay, 4. Did anybody look into that? Who are those 4 horns?
They were, those 4 were, Alexander the Great had no descendants. So they were 4 of his captains or chief officers or whatever. And they each took a different part of Alexander the Great's kingdom, but they were never as powerful as Alexander.
Absolutely. Never as powerful, but so it was divided up, and those 4 generals ruled Greece at that time.
Which the national emblem of Macedonia was a goat.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah.
Well done. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ram is Medes and Persians, the goat is Greece. And after the big horn is broken and then the 4 generals arrives, and then what happens?
But it says out of one of those horns came a little horn or grew a
Mhm. Yeah, out of one of those, then comes this, does it say little or small?
little.
Okay, little. So what do we learn about that little horn?
Well, it grew exceedingly great toward the south, east, and the glorious land, which would be Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 23 says, a king of bold face and one who understands riddles shall arise. His power shall be great.
Next phrase is key there also, but not by his own power.
Mm-hmm. So this little horn, I'm trying to go back to the vision itself, because I think that gives us more information about the little horn. So his power will be great. He's shrewd, he will cause deceit, magnify himself in his heart, destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes. This is still and this is at the end of chapter. But he will be broken without human agency. Let's go back to the vision itself and verse 9. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn. So out of one of those 4 generals, came forth a small horn, and he grew exceedingly toward the south, the east, toward the beautiful land, Israel. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. Okay, it even magnified itself equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. Let's talk about that. The commander of the host and the sacrifices, the regular sacrifices. On account of transgression, verse 12, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply? While the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled. And he said, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. So when it talks about the host, this is confusing because we look in Revelation and it talks about Satan being thrown down and the stars being thrown down to earth. In verse 10, it says it grew up to the host of heaven. That word for host is Saba, which means people of God. People of God. And previous to that, it says that he goes out toward the beautiful land, okay, which we know is Israel. So think about this being the host being the Israelites. There's a reference, I forgot to write it down, in Exodus that talks about the host pertaining to the Israelites. There's reference in Revelation pertaining to the Israelites being the host. And so if these are the Israelites, he's reaching out toward the beautiful land of Israel, then he talks about he grew up to the host of heaven, to the Israelites. He magnified itself to equal with the commander of the host. Who would the commander of the host be? Yes, Gayan, I see that. Yes.
God.
It would be God, the God of Israel. Okay. And then he stops the sacrifices. So where are the sacrifices held?
In the temple in Jerusalem.
Right. And at this time, Israel will be back in their country because Cyrus allows them to go back to rebuild their temple. So during the time that Greece is in power, they are in Israel and they are sacrificing. Okay. So he comes in and he says, no more sacrifices. And in the vision, the question is asked, well, how long will that last, that the sacrifices are not allowed to happen? And what's the answer?
2,300 evenings and mornings.
Okay. So he knows that there will be an end after these 2,300 evenings and mornings. The question is about the sacrifices. How long will it last that we cannot sacrifice in the temple? Is that the question? Okay, so we're talking about Israelites. We're talking about the beautiful land. We're talking about the Israelites being the host. We're talking about the commander of the host being their God. We're talking about their sacrifices in the temple, that this little horn stops for 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay. So if you do the math on that, there's two schools of thought on that. 2,300 evenings and mornings being a day, like 2,000 days, complete days. And that would be 6 years and 5 months and 20 days. from the time that that the little horn moves into Israel in 170 BC until 164 BC, when he is no longer ruling them. So if that were the case, if it were days, the other school of thought is that it's sacrifices. So, because the question is, how long will we not be able to sacrifice? How long will he put a stop to sacrifices? Okay. They sacrifice morning and evening, so there'll be 2 per day. So then you cut that 2,300 in half, which makes it 3 years and 70 days that he will stop them from sacrificing in the temple. So either way, it's either 6 years from the time that he came into Israel and started persecuting them, or it's 3 years when he stopped the sacrifices. It makes more sense to me that it's talking about the sacrifices, because that was the question. How long? The whole context is about they're not allowed to sacrifice in the temple. They stopped regular sacrifice, and he just flings truth to the ground. Like that's not truth. We're just trampling on the truth. Then the question is about the sacrifices. So it seems like this little horn is going to stop them from sacrificing in the temple for 3 years and 70 days. Okay. That's a long time. Okay. That's the
Can
little
I ask
horn.
you a question?
You can.
You differentiated between little and small. Like you asked if it was said small or if it said little. Is there a reason that you differentiated those 2 words?
Because I was looking back at chapter 7 and the little horn in chapter 7. Okay. And wait, this one was in chapter 8 is a small, mine says a small horn in verse 9.
Oh, yeah, my version says little horn. And it does get confusing. They both talk about a little horn, except in chapter 7, that little horn came from the 10, whereas in chapter 8, this little horn comes off of one of the 4. So you got to keep in mind that that's 2 different horns. They're not the same.
Okay,
Right.
that's what I wanted. So this
Right.
could be Antiochus
Antiochus Epiphanes.
That's not the right word.
Yeah.
That's right. That little horn
Okay.
in chapter 8 is Antiochus Epiphanes.
Okay. I wanted to
Okay.
check to see
No,
if I was
that's-
reading
no,
that right.
You are reading it right. And
Okay.
the thing is, to differentiate is because, like Betty was saying, and if you look at your chart, if you have spelled this out, you see in chapter 7,
Mhm.
the little horn of chapter 7 comes out of the 4th kingdom. Okay. The little horn of chapter 8 comes out of the 3rd kingdom. Okay. So, and remember who we determined that little horn is in chapter 7.
The Antichrist.
Right. And we compared what we knew from Daniel to Revelation 12 and 13, where it clearly makes it, makes the case that little horn in chapter 7 is the Antichrist. And his
There
rule
was something
stops.
that I had read that just
Mhm.
was talking about Antiochus Epiphanes being the picture of the Antichrist to come.
Foreshadowing of the Antichrist. Yeah, yes. And we see in chapter 8 the listing of all that this little horn will, what is his character, what is his nature, what will he do? Okay. The very end of chapter 8 just talks about that he will arise, he's insolent, he's skilled in intrigue, power will be mighty, but it's not his own power. He will destroy to an extraordinary degree. He'll prosper and perform his will. So he goes in there and he stops the Jews from sacrificing in the temple. Okay. He makes them, he kills a pig on the altar. That's what he does. If you look at the history, and all of the commentaries say without a doubt that he was the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, and Alexander the Great was the big horn. So, and again, it's like a foreshadowing. It can't be that he was the Antichrist. Why not?
We see that the Antichrist was destroyed after 3.5 years, which they say is the end of the tribulation, which hasn't yet happened. Whereas you mentioned the 6 years, if that was what it was, started at 170 BC through 164. That's obviously way, 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 way before the tribulation. So they can't
Right.
be the same.
Right, right. And that's why it's important to see that little horn came out of Greece, but the other little horn comes out of the fourth kingdom, right? And the fourth kingdom happens right before which kingdom? When the fourth kingdom ends, what kingdom are we in?
Jesus, the kingdom of Jesus.
Exactly, exactly. So the kingdom of Greece is not the end. It's not the end. So that little horn, and it talks about Greece coming in there, and because, what was it 12, verse 12, on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice. Okay. So again, what is it that got Israel to Babylon?
They're sinning and turning away from God.
Right. So why were they taken captive? Because they were turning away from God. So he took them captive in order to bring them back, right? So they're in captivity for 70 years because of their transgression. And now it appears that in the future, when Greece is in control, they will also be there will also be transgressions significant enough for God to have to punish that. And so he comes in, and it says that he will be given over to, the host will be given over to the horn. Okay. So this is the thing that's good about having things side by side, because you have the little horn in the fourth beast, the fourth kingdom, but you have a little horn in the third one, which is Greece. So we know that Greece was not the final kingdom. So Daniel, again, is in Babylon at the time. Babylon is the only kingdom. Okay. Israel was in their land until they were taken to Babylon. They were ruling themselves. Okay. And then things went bad, and then God takes them captive, and now they're being ruled first time by a Gentile nation, Babylon. Then they'll be ruled by another Gentile nation, Medes and Persian. Then they'll be ruled by another Gentile nation, Greece. Then they will be ruled by another Gentile nation, Rome. Okay. And then, but eventually we know that kingdom will be God's kingdom, the stone that destroys all the others. And that kingdom will never end. Yeah. So again, what Daniel is seeing, nobody else knows. I mean, he knows what's going to happen. He knows now, and again, there's still 11 years left in the Babylonian kingdom. But what does Daniel know? Who's coming next? The Medes and Persians, which will happen in chapter 5 of Daniel. He knows what's happening after the Medes and Persians. He doesn't understand it, does he?
I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Mhm.
In fact, what does he say at the end of chapter 8?
He lay sick for some days.
Yeah. He was exhausted and sick for days.
Yeah, the text in the book here, which is ESV, says he was appalled by the vision and did not understand it.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I have a question on verse 19.
Mhm.
It talks about, it's to let you know, I'm giving you a sign it will occur at the final period of indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time at the end. So this is a long period of time, right? It's not the end of the end,
Right.
the huge timeline of thousands of years.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to let you know with your final period of indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end, right? The end. Which I'm sure he doesn't understand either.
Exactly.
The end. So when he says this is, I'm pondering that verse, Nancy. I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Then he starts with the ram, starts with Greece. And he only talks about Greece. You know, he doesn't talk about the fourth beast. He doesn't talk about anything after that. So, and I think I recall reading somewhere that one of the commentaries said that this is talking about the end of Greece and that indignation that they're going through for those 2,300 days of not being able to sacrifice. So that's a possibility that's what that indignation is talking about, because he just talks about the Medes and Persians, but then he just goes into this whole explanation about Greece and the sacrifices being stopped. And then he doesn't talk about the fourth kingdom. So that's a possibility that's what he's talking about there. Is just, I'm just going to let you know that in this third beast, this is what will happen, but there will be an end to that. That's just, I have no authority to say, but that's one thing that I read that makes sense when you figure that, like in chapter 7, most of what he said was about the fourth kingdom, right? There was a lot of information about the fourth kingdom in chapter 8, which is how many years after chapter 7, the vision of chapter 7?
Not that many.
3, like 3 years.
So in chapter 7, it said it was during the first year
Yeah.
of the king. Okay. Chapter 8 says it's the third year.
Third year.
Okay. So he has that vision in chapter 7, and then 2 years later, he has this other vision that gives him a different perspective. It's chapter 7 was a lot about the fourth kingdom. Chapter 8 is a lot about the third kingdom. A lot of details. So trying to put all that together. I don't think Daniel could have handled it 2 years earlier to have all of it, to have all of it, but just this progression of understanding what is going to happen. So Daniel, any thoughts about Daniel himself and how this would have affected him and why he would have been so distraught?
Well, I think when it says that, like in verse 27, that he lay sick for some days, and like it says at the end of the verse, he didn't understand it, but I think sounds like it affected him so emotionally, because this was his people, the Jewish people, and to think of what was going to happen to them. you know, all the tribulations and that, you know, further tribulation they'd have to go through. Just, yeah, it made him
Well,
sick.
he's already been through 60 years of it, right?
Yeah.
He's
Mhm.
he's around for both Babylon and a little bit of Medo-Persia, but Greece doesn't even come in. You know, Greece is 200 years out, so they're still in a bad way. You know, and then you've got Rome, and you know, another 300 years, almost 300 years out.
Yeah, so for Daniel, you have to remember, these are his people. And we're going to see that, I think in chapter 9, where might be in chapter 9, where he prays because he sees what his people have done. And so he prays on behalf of the whole nation. At this point in history, God is working with Israel as a nation. As a nation. And these are Daniel's people, that's his nation. This is the Israelites as a whole, not individually, but as a nation. This is what's happening to them.
You know,
So
he
yeah, for Daniel, yeah, go ahead.
took his job seriously. He said, then I got up again and carried on the king's business. You know, it's like he almost kind of had to know this to do his daily job
Mm-hmm.
in Babylon.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, because at this point, he's still in the service of the Babylonian king.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I took a little solace in his last comment was, and did not understand it. Here he had Gabriel explain it to him, and you know, and still he's like, I just don't get it. And I've read this, I've read the commentaries on it. I think I get a lot of it, but there's a lot of it I don't understand, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's totally okay.
And we have the benefit of history to help us understand it. He didn't.
Right, right. And speaking of the benefit of history to help us understand it, what does that tell you about God and his prophecies? What does that tell you?
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, over a period of years and nations, and it's all been proven, you know, through the Medes and Persians and Greece, Alexander the Great, Antiochus Epiphanes, they are all in the history books, fulfilling this vision that Daniel had. So it's like the word of God is the word of God, and you can't stop it.
It also reassures me that God always had a plan all along, and he still does. We don't have to worry because he's got a plan.
He's in control.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
In
And that,
something that I was reading, it was talking about even just the language that it was written in, because it was written in a way that would be understanding to them at the time that Daniel was writing. I mean, I know that's actually something we talk about a lot, like the cultural aspect of when it was written. But even just like the horns being kingdoms, but the reality is that it's nations. You know, like just even out the sorry, I lost my train of thought. Even what we know from the prophecies that have been fulfilled, we are looking at it also from a different culture. So it's even different language that we use. So I think that like we do have we definitely have understanding. Daniel doesn't, but we still don't have all of it because sometimes there's even disconnect there. If that makes
right.
sense. If I'm
No,
explaining what I'm
I
thinking
think it,
right.
yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah. 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 And I was looking at some pictures about the Citadel of Susa which was built after when the Medes and Persians were ruling. And some of those remains still stand. You know, it's like, yeah, you go to Rome and you see the Colosseum, and those things still stand, which go right back to this statue that Nebuchadnezzar, the vision that he had in chapter 2. It goes right back to that.
Mm.
So much proof. History has proven that this all happened. And so go back to the statue. So most of this has happened. Okay. This stone has not yet happened. But what do we know?
It will.
It will. It definitely will.
Mm.
So there's the end of the book. You know? But Daniel, I mean, I just never want to lose track of Daniel being a human in that situation, taken captive at age 15, being totally faithful to his God throughout all of it, representing his people in Babylon, taking care of his people in Babylon. And then he gets this vision about what will happen to them. Absolutely heartbroken for his people. How do we feel? I guess, how do we feel about our people? I don't even know if that's a good question.
Well, we should feel heartbroken also because so many of our people are obviously not on the right path.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the time after Christ, when the message of Christ, that salvation is there. And until that stone comes, that's our role, is to get more people saved, more people believing in Jesus, more people that are going to be in that final kingdom with us. So yeah, we need to be heartbroken for those who don't know. You know, it's always about the unsaved. What message we can take to them.
Mm.
So
We are in a broken world, aren't we? And people have turned away from God and put themselves in the center. And it feels to me more than ever, but maybe it isn't. I suppose there were always wicked people who put themselves in the place of God. But it does feel as if we're all far too intelligent to believe that there's something bigger than we are, you know, these days. I don't know.
and when Daniel's people got to that place back in Jerusalem, in Israel, where they turned away from God, that's when he had to execute justice. And that's when he sent Babylon to take them captive in order to turn them back to him. So when he operates out of in a way of justice like that with his people, it's always to bring them back, open their eyes, you know, to see that his plan. So how he operates doesn't always seem pleasant to us, okay, but necessary. So we have to be good, faithful servants of God, like Daniel, and have the heart of Daniel and have the faith of Daniel. And hopefully we have a little more understanding than Daniel had, even though we don't totally get it all yet, but we still have 4 chapters. Okay. So we'll see what we know at the end of those 4 chapters. Deal? All right. So next week, lesson 5, chapter 9. Okay. So you all have a good week. Ponder all of these things in your heart.